Curselock LitRPG Curse Magic Adventure. By Left Right. Chapter 66, Lord of Healing. The response was quick and clean. Leland rushed across a dark plain, one of infinite expansive cold. He saw nothing but darkness, until he didn't. The domain of the Lord of Healing came in like a threatened rabid dog. The darkness halted instantly, throwing him onto a sunlit gravel road. He skidded across the rocks as his momentum ended, only his mage robes protecting his delicate skin. Groaning, Leland fell to his butt, the overhead sun blinding. He groaned again, finding his resolve and pushing himself up. In a single word, he felt small. Looking around pulled a gasp from his lips, one that resounded in echoing walls and towering statues. Without taking a step, Leland spun around, fully taking in the view. Leading on either side of the gravel path were thick green bushes dotted with brightly lit specks of color. The flowers seemed to take note of him, each turning to view the newcomer with interest. Or, at least, as much interest as a flower could muster. Beyond the bushes was red brick and grey mortar. Block by block towered higher and higher, encompassing the small alleyway. Yet, the sun never seemed to cast shadow. Actually, the longer Leland thought about it, the more impossible it seemed. The sun was slightly askew in an afternoon sky, one that surely would have brought shadows into the alley. Leland's inner musing was cut short as a figure appeared at the end of the gravel pathway. There, standing within the entrance to this domain's primary feature, was a young woman. She wore white robes laced in gold. She kept her hands clasped and her smile tight. She looked at Leland like an annoyed older sister, one that had been time and time again told not to scold the younger. She, in a single motion, waved him forward. Hesitating, Leland looked at his destination. A cathedral, that much was ever apparent. From the vaulted spires that reached toward the sun, to the overt windows filled with stained glass imagery. It was chiseled, he realized as he neared, entirely from a single type of rock. Marble? Limestone? Whatever the case, the pure white walls and towering roof glowed in the sun's gentle rays. Nearing the building, Leland suddenly could hear singing. Divine hymns, the kind reserved for only the most devout. The harmonious symphonics glazed through the air, vibrating and growing with natural power. Then, there was a bell. A single ring, from deep within the cathedral. The sound blazed through the alleyway, shaking the bushes and rebounding off the brick walls. Leland instinctually moved to cover his ears, but stopped. He felt no pain. In fact, the bell calmed him. Eased him. Made him feel welcome. His feet pulled him faster at that point, anything to follow the sound of the bell. The gravel crunched at his feet, breaking the monotony of song. As he neared, the brick walls abruptly ended, casting the cathedral's full form. After a flight of stairs, the church laid upon a pedestal. It sat silently, above everyone and everything, watching. Waiting. Judging. Then Leland saw them. People, hundreds, thousands, even. Slowly walking to the church, hand in hand singing the call to divinity, a mob moved. Up the stairs they went, each wearing white and gold. Some held candles, other thick tomes. Some radiated golden warmth, others led the sick, a few even carried weapons. For only a moment Leland wondered who these weapons were meant for. Searching the crowd provided him with an answer. Far in the back, beyond the sea of white and gold, lay color and pleading cries. People, begging for a miracle. Begging for health. Begging for their desperate wishes to be heard. They weren't sick. They weren't injured. They only wished to. A brisk cough pulled Leland from his thoughts. He turned and jumped. The woman had moved closer, her eyebrow raised and her cheeks puffed. She hummed, spun on her heel, and said, "Follow me, Mr. Silver." Leland gulped, but quickly found the means to move. He was led through the cathedral's side passages. There were no grand mosaics or lifelike statues, pews, or places to worship, not even a single painting hung from a nail. They went up a set of wooden stairs and were suddenly above the main hall. Looking through the occasional window, Leland's eyes went wide. The congregation lined up in a single file line, a line that led to a single woman. She stood, a bright smile on her tired face. One by one a person would approach, say a few words, then the woman would either touch their forehead or not. Either way, the person faded like mist against a fan. "They're not real, you know," the woman leading Leland said. "They are simple prayers. Which, I guess, makes them real? Prayers? Leland asked, his voice fleeting. Wishes given form. She hears them all. He asked, already knowing the answer. The woman's face lit up. My lord, of course. Leland didn't reply to that and quickly fell back in line. He was led to a small room, one full of books, scrolls, maps, and plenty of alchemical ingredients. Jars of oddly colored liquid lined the back wall, each housing many preserved things. Bugs, animals, flowers, even the occasional gem or rock. Please, have a seat, the woman said, her tone a little less than a command despite her sing-songy cadence. Would you like a drink while you wait? Answering with a head shake, Leland sat. Instantly his fatigue disappeared. He groaned in pleasure, weeks of traveling washed away in an instant. It took him a moment to recover from the feeling, a moment that he was glad no one saw. The woman was standing in the corner, watching him. Do you find the furniture desirable, Mr. Silver? Gulping down his embarrassment, Leland spoke up, yes. Very much. How does? The whole collection was created by a rank 7 legacy of carpentry. Rank 7? That's quite powerful. In mortal means, anyways. With a shock, Leland suddenly remembered where he was. The woman standing before him wasn't just a person. She was obviously something more. Something closer to a lord than mortal, something that was now playing babysitter for a real lord. Earlier you said those people weren't real. Sort of, at least. Quite, she answered. What does that make you? Leland instantly regretted the question. It sounded so rude once spoken. He knew better, he was raised better. He fumbled over a hasty apology, one that was interrupted by a simple raised hand. He paused, finding the woman chuckling slightly. Slowly she lowered her hand. I am nothing more than an eternal helper. Frowning, Leland deliberated on another, possibly rude, question. His mind worked, rewriting his concern. You seem like more than nothing to me. That is quite nice of you to say, Mr. Silver. She gave a soft smile. But I am nothing more. A simple wish, I am. One just like the others, only the person who created me with prayer is the lord of this domain. Thinking back on it, Leland realized the woman in the main hall did look familiar. That sounds like more than nothing to me. Her smile fell at that. My lord's wish is no more important than anyone else's. Leland instantly saw the hypocrisy of the statement. He bit his tongue, holding his issue. The woman's frown deepened at that. Speak your mind. Leland tried to shake his head, but a golden power zipped across the room and compelled him to speak. If your lord's wish is equal to everyone else's, then why are the people outside wearing colors other than white and gold being ignored? The wish's eyes fell hollow at that. She did, for a time. All wishes were welcome. But then anomalies began to sprout. Greed was the first. A prayer asking not for health or healing, but for monetary gain. By that point, the gates had opened, so to speak. She tried to help them all, almost to her ruin. That is why I was created. To protect the cathedral. To filter those wishes that are actually in need. That was her wish, to help those who actually need it. Still being imbued by the golden power, Leland was forced to speak his mind. Some people can be helped with gold. True, the wish spoke. But that is beyond my lord's capacity. She is the lord of healing, not the lord of currency. Why you then? I mean your lord. People will pray to whoever they think will listen. My lord is simply known for miracles. The golden power exited Leland, yet he still felt the need to speak. You still sound more than nothing to me. You have a kind heart, Mr. Silver. I can see why the Lord of Curses speaks so highly of you. Leland's mouth gaped at that. She talks about me. Quite often, yes, she said, giving him another smile. But we are not here to talk about such things. Yet, the person who you are destined to speak with has yet to arrive. I fear you may be waiting for a long while. Maybe you should leave and return another, less busy time. Frowning, Leland asked, can you not create a contract with me? You are a part of her, after all. She shook her head. The power I hold is not the type you are looking for. But your intentions are pure. To heal your friends if the need arises. Admirable. I see, Leland stood, sticking out his hand to the wish. It was a pleasure to meet you. Likewise, Mr. Silver. She took his hand and shook. Before I go, may I ask one question? The wish tilted her head quizzically. Leland took that as a go-ahead. May I have your name? I've been referring to you as Wish in my head, but it feels odd. A wave of emotions flooded the prayer. She almost stumbled back, only Leland and their clasped hands holding her steady. How long had it been since she last used her name? Since her lord, her creator, used her name? She started to be called the Lord of Healing 9,000 years ago. Did she even remember her name? It hasn't been needed. Call me Lily. Yes, Lily. Call me Lily. Leland gave her hand one last shake. Well, Ms. Lily, it was a pleasure to meet you. Lily's eyes turned away from the young man in front of her. They drifted along the floor, moving out toward the door, and into the grand hall. She couldn't see her lord, but she always knew where she was. And, for the first time in a millennia, her lord looked back. A silent conversation played between Lord and Wish in an instant. Lily looked back to Leland. Query the Lord of Nature. Ask for the spell touch of regeneration. Wah! Leland's question was cut off as Lily finally let go of his hand. In an instant he was back to the blackness between worlds. He floated for a silent moment before his eyes opened back in the real world. Jude instantly noticed and put down a bowl of cold stew. Hey, how'd it go? With a grunt, Leland lay back and watched the stars above. It was interesting. Chapter 67, Ruins. It was interesting, Leland recounted. After his long stint in a different reality, he shifted his body uncomfortably while laying on the rough floor of the forest. With a groan, he sat up, pushing away his sleeping bag and looking at the dying embers of their fire. A glance to the moon told him he had been speaking with Lily for most of the night. You go to bed, I'll stay on watch. It was then Leland noticed a small squirrel resting in the crook of Jude's arm. Jude eyed him slowly, trying not to wake his sleeping friend. You going to practice your new contract? I can be the testing dummy. Pain doesn't. I didn't make a contract, Leland interrupted. Also, what's with the squirrel? Animals like me, the legacy of berserkers said. And why not? The Lord of Healing was busy with Lord Y things, I guess. I was given a recommendation on which lord to contract next, though. I don't mind staying up if you want to do that now. Leland strained his back, cracking his spine with a multitude of audible pops. No, he said, adding a new bundle of sticks to the fire. I don't want to contact a lord in a forest like this again. Not that smart to begin with, not to mention how stiff I feel. Jude accepted that answer, then laid down, shifting the squirrel to his lay on his chest. With a yawn he said, Wake me if anything happens. With his friend quickly falling asleep, Leland was left alone with his thoughts. Quickly they devolved from his time in the Lord of Healing's domain to his struggles with his own legacy. Removing his grimoire from his hand tattoo, he perused the first pages, checking them over for any changes. His slow page flipping eventually came to an end and he stared at the last page. Gently, like he held an ancient document, Leland tugged at the seam between the back cover and his locked spell. Saying it didn't move was a lie. It did, just not in any meaningful way. Before he could see the last word in every sentence, now he could see the edge of the letter before. It wasn't much. What am I doing wrong? He asked his tattoo after returning his grimoire to it. The depiction of the crow didn't move. Didn't react. Didn't make any hints toward his question. Silent treatment now? That's nice. Thanks, my lord. That did get a reaction from the tattoo, but nothing more than a slight shift and a proper glare. Leland glared back, like somehow his irritated staring would help him in his struggles. One thing was for sure, he felt better after doing it. Then, he didn't. His state of mind changed like a light switch, and suddenly he felt guilty. Sorry, he muttered to the bird. The tattoo rolled its wings, turning back into its original pose. With a sigh, Leland thought back to what the huntress had suggested. Searching his mind. Rather quickly, he drowned out all noise from his other curses, focusing intently on the screams. They were so vivid, so real. Like a stadium of people all burning at the same time, or a city. The thought slingshot Leland from his own mind. He started panting, like a child afraid of the dark. Why had his thoughts drifted to a city being destroyed? The question loomed over him, knocking all semblance of tiredness from his heavy eyes. Just what is this curse? He asked himself, finding solace in not having an answer. Maybe, he wasn't ready for the answer. Maybe he. Something fluttered on the periphery of his mind. He reached out for the revelation, finding it deep within the recesses of his legacy. A warning? Or maybe a set of instructions. He couldn't decipher it. He couldn't understand it. He pushed a bit more, focusing on the blurry information deep within his mind. His focus snapped and the revelation fell apart like a derailed train. Desperately, Leland fought to reconnect the dots. But the damage was already done. He lost it. It took a few minutes, but eventually Leland faced the facts. He was close to something important, something that he wasn't sure if he truly wanted to know. And that scared him. With his mind only partially interested at this point, Leland re-examined his grimoire but paused upon looking at the last page. It had parted slightly, a small portion of the corner was bent up. Through the fleeting light of a flickering fire, there in hand-drawn black ink, was a single word. The last word. The only word of the page he could fully read. Calamity. So, I figure once we get to the Hargrave ruins we set up camp for the day. I know the sun will still be high in the air, but we have a quest to do, Glennie said. Agreed. Hopefully the undead soldiers are more fair to fight than those dumb bats, Jude responded with a laugh. More dangerous as well. Gah. That's no problem. That's true, but we are going to need more of a game plan than simply go fight monster. Do we really though? Jude asked with a bit of snark. We just beat them down until they stop moving. Glennie rolled his eyes at that. Exactly why we need a plan. Undead don't simply die. You've got to destroy their internal cores. Or I guess if you have some sort of holy damage attack, that'd work too. Holy smoly, just tell me where to hit and I'll hit. Am I right, Leels? Leland, stuck in his own thoughts, didn't answer. Leland. Leels. Hey, he finally asked, finding both his friends looking intently at him. Sorry, I wasn't listening. What's up? Jude squinted at him. We were just talking about fighting the undead for the quest. Oh, right. Hargrave ruins. With a deep breath, Leland shuffled a piece of parchment out of his pocket. The note the quest giver gave us says. Destroy the undead core. Does that help? Glennie face-palmed. Jude laughed. That's what we were talking about, if you cared to listen. Sorry. The page in my grimoire unlocked a bit. I can now read a word. Glennie raised an eyebrow at that. What does it say? Calamity. Calamity. Jude asked. Does that mean anything to you? Leland deliberated on his answer. On one hand, no it did not. It was just a word that was in line with the theatrics of his legacy. But on the other. The Moonless Lord called me the son of the Calamity. I didn't think anything of it back then. Glennie and Jude shared a glance. And you don't know what that means? Not at all. Could be nothing, Glennie supplied. At the very least, it's a cool title, Jude said before swirling around an imaginary magic staff. All shall kneel before me, the son of the Calamity. His voice echoed off the tall trees, reverberating back like he intended to give his childish showing more pizzazz. Jude smiled triumphantly. Right, Glennie added with a shake of his head. Something like that. I don't know, guys. I feel like the word was a hint, but I have no idea what to do with it, Leland said plainly. Good pantomime, though. Jude beamed. You'll get there, Glennie said. But for now, let's table the discussion. We're here. The others perked up at their friend's declaration, both looking around like meerkats trying to see over the underbrush. A small sign was all they found, one that looked like it was erected a century ago. The sign, in bold yet faded letters, read Hargrave Armory. It pointed off into the bushes, a small snaking path leading through the trees. The boys stopped before the sign and stretched. They went over the game plan one last time, yet all agreed that since it was their first time fighting undead, they would go slow for the first few encounters. They followed the path and eventually came upon an overgrown clearing. Leland felt the need to whisper the history of this place, stating that all information is good information when it comes to battle. The others muttered in agreement and Leland started spouting off information about the, now, ruins. Once upon a time, the Queen had posted armories along the front lines. A fortified location for soldiers to quickly gear up, sleep, and eat while defending the rest of the kingdom. Some 100 years later, the humans had garnered enough territory to make the armories obsolete. So, here they sat. Forgotten and long abandoned. Including the souls of those who died here. And so, undead started sprouting up, Leland finished. Glennie frowned at the story. Why didn't the Lord of Souls help those souls pass on? Leland thought about the question for a long minute. He didn't know, but it was a good question. Not sure, but I'll make sure to ask him when I contract him. With that, the group pushed out of the underbrush and into the clearing. The former armory had frankly fallen apart. Once fortified walls now stood as rusted metal and bug-infested rotted wood. The two-story building had partly collapsed, leaving most of the roof caved in like a mine after an earthquake. A stone pathway led into the building, no doubt for ease of moving wagons so long ago. Now, the path was cracked with the power of nature. Flowers and grass grew high out of the stone, the lack of trees making their reach toward the sun all the more encompassing. Occasional scratches were etched through the path, each still housing traces of sediment. Crouching down and rubbing the scratch, Glennie spoke up, "These are fresh. The wind hasn't displaced they." His words cut off at the same moment his eyes went wide. With a practiced motion, he launched up, yanking Leland and Jude to the ground. They pressed into the tall grass, only Glennie's sparky cloak obscuring their bodies. Jude began to question his friend's actions, but a dull thud followed quickly by the sound of metal on stone, stopped him. Slowly, something passed by the obscured trio. It limped into their vision, a jostling padded vest flapping haphazardly with every step, only held on by a rusted suit of metal. Then their eyes were in line with a sword. Massive, iron, and jagged like a broken kitchen knife. It dragged across the path, slicing through the grass like a thin lawn mower. The undead continued its patrol, eventually rounding to the other side of the ruins. That, Glennie coughed, was an undead knight, which makes this quest increase a rank. We can take it, Jude proudly said. The others stared at him like he had kicked a dog, although neither disagreed. Chapter 68, Undead. They moved as a single unit, pushing past the tall overgrown path, toward the safety of the edge of the ruins. There they stopped, with their backs to the wall, and prepared. Jude unleashed his battle axe from his hand tattoo, Glennie turned invisible and extended his sightless king powers into long thin spikes, Leland readied his grimoire and got into position behind the others. We run toward the forest if more undead show up and or the undead knight is too powerful, Leland said, pointing toward the way they came. With that, the trio merged into the shadows and waited. General jobs of who did what had long been worked out between the three friends. Jude fought in the front lines, absorbing damage while dealing plenty himself. Glennie often flanked and looked for opportunistic times to strike. And Leland stayed far in the backlands, blasting away with his curses. This fight was no different. As soon as the knight stepped out around the edge of the ruins. It was the skeletal variant, chalk white bones connected together into a humanoid form by nothing other than undead magic. Bits of rotting flesh wrapped around its ribs and neck, just enough to prove the knight was once human. Or, at least, was made from human parts. There was no telling what the knight looked like before its soul was transformed into an undead core. Leland started off the battle. He slammed his palm into his tome, brandishing the halo of the Harbinger. Purple swirled around his palm, running up along his arm and round his head. There it found purchase, forming into a floating ring of dark energies. The magical potency of Leland's contract with the Lord of Magic blazed to life, igniting his soul into action. Mana and life force came together at his word, siphoning to his fingers for a brutal snap. Fracture, he yelled, pushing the whole of his strength into the curse. At the same time, Glennie made his presence known. Two spikes of pure red carnage appeared briefly as he attacked, each stabbing into the ribcage of the knight. His blades, however, were thrown off course by the undead's heavy armor. Jude then, Leland's spell connected, sending a sharp crack into the air. Still invisible, Glennie's eyes widened and he quickly backstepped just in time as well, as the undead raised and dropped its chipped sword. A brutal rush of air whipped through the area in which Glennie once stood before the sword smashed into the ground. The knight lurched, yanking its weapon from the dirt and spinning with its instincts. Jude and the monster clashed weapons, sparks blasting from the collision. Each reared back to attack again, only for an invisible young man to interfere. Dismissing his conjured weapons, Glennie dove into the undead, latching onto its weapon-holding arm. With the force of a rank 2 monster, the knight shoved him off a moment later and moved to intercept Jude's attack. Only, it was too late. Battle axe met skull and helmet with another hail of sparks. The undead was sent toppling, its head more so than its body. The body landed with a dull thud, its heavy armor stopping its momentum short. The head, however, rolled like a rubber ball, bouncing into the air with every imperfection it rolled over. Did I get it? Jude asked no one in particular. The legacy of the berserker spun around, only finding Leland as Glenny was still invisible. Leland gave him a pensive smile, one that quickly turned into a frown as the jingle of heavy armor sounded. Jude spun back, finding the undead's body slowly standing. "Alright," Jude cursed. "Got to destroy the core." He shrugged to himself, stalking forward and raising his weapon. A voice appeared beside Leland as Jude started laying into the monster. "Your spell didn't break its bone," Glenny said. Leland flinched, cursing out loud. "Come on man, don't do that." "Sorry." "And what do you mean?" Glenny's invisible voice continued, "I saw the spell take." A crack formed along a bone in its foot. "Along?" Leland echoed. "Not through." "Afraid not." "I see." Taking a moment, Leland thought through his options. "Undead might be a monster type we stay away from. My spell might seem quite good against the skeletons, but if I can't break a knight's bones, well, I'm useless then." Still invisible, Glenny frowned at that. "What about your other spells?" "Birds, the slow, sucking its soul. The crows won't be anything more than a distraction." "The slow," Leland paused, pooling mana and life force around his heart. He expelled the sight of the undead being beaten down again and again by Jude. Nothing happened. No emotional connection. No magical response. The curse simply failed. "Looks like undead, at least skeletons, are immune to exhaustion." "Makes sense since they don't have hearts and stuff," Leland shook his head. "And they don't have souls, so Circle of Souls is out as well." Glenny cancelled his invisibility, and patted his friend on the back. "No problem then. No more undead quests until you are sure you can break their bones. Or until you get a contract that can do something else. Or whatever that calamity spell is going to be," Leland finished. "Exactly. Surely Calamity is going to be able to kill some Undia." The sound of metal on bone stopped Glenny's comment cold. Next came the dreadful huff of a rabid horse, one that chittered with dread and years of tormented abuse. Then, the ground split. Jude leaped back, landing beside his two friends. "Something's wrong." As if to punctuate his words, the undead knight slowly stood, its heavy armor dented and torn. Its head rolled over before skipping off the ground and floating back to its body's shoulders. The undead took a moment to orient its head, shifting it until low cracks sounded. It then looked toward the split ground eagerly. First came a pair of flesh-stripped hooves. They breached the surface with a powerful thrust, pulling the remainder of its body from the soft soil. Dark mist escaped the ground, along with it the pale white skull of a great beast. Long bones came next, along with bits of fur and flesh. A twisted horse fully revealed itself, its hollow eye sockets oozing rotten dark magics and the breath of an undead. Leland's eyes went wide. A nightmare stead. Glenny and Jude both cursed, the former of which turning invisible while the latter huffed forward. The skeletal knight bounced its lower jaw, grinding its teeth in boisterous giggles. It made no effort to hide its movements. It picked up its weapon and climbed onto the back of its mount. It hoisted its sword forward, pointing at Jude. Jude's face fell, a snarl forming like a feral cat. Rage poured from his legacy, sending his feet into a swift dash. Distantly, he could hear Leland yell something. But none of that mattered right now. He was embarrassed. How many times did he strike the knight while it was down? Dozens? And he couldn't kill it? Despicable. He leaped, sailing through the air and landing just before the undead horse. The ground cratered upon impact, his evolved ability coming in full force. Stones jutted from the grass in a wide circle, encasing the stead. Jude let loose his upgraded primary strike, sending his axe into the flank of the undead beast. It sheared into bone and rotted flesh, wedging itself deep. Jude leveraged all of his strength against, yet still failed to pull the axe out. He jumped back, dodging the knight's next attack. They both growled at each other, waiting. Meanwhile, Leland had activated the first portion of Circle of Souls. No flames poured from the ground, no green mist formed from the undead. Only a single entity appeared, one holding out its hand in offering. A soul of the damned, one carrying a lost cultist soul from Shoutwell. Leland accepted the gift with open arms, allowing the lost soul entry into his body. Power entered his own soul and radiated blazing warmth. In an instant, Leland's life force was replenished and he was overflowing with raw power. A pressure was already forming in the back of his mind, not one of pain and ache, but rather a simple reminder. This magic had to be used with caution. Knowing the battle wasn't going to get to that point, Leland snapped his fingers and spoke, "Fracture." With the two boons of the Lord of Magic's contract and devouring a soul, Leland's magic took, cracking through the bones of the undead. He repeated the spell again and again, each time finding knowing the curse acted like he wished it to. The horse had it the worse, the added weight on its back sitting upon multiple broken vertebrae and ribs. At some point, Glennie had attacked, cutting deep into the stead with twin spikes. He carved into bone, twisting his conjured weapons with viciousness and grace. His cloak briefly became visible, a starry night sheen fueling the attack. He dodged back, easily outpacing the knight's now wild swings. In tandem with Leland's spells, a hunk of horse fell, loosening Jude's axe. The legacy of the berserker screeched, his war cry ability forcing his blood to pump with great vigor. He rushed forward, sliding to his weapon before sending a red crescent of rage at the undead beast. The attack cleaved into its front leg, carving into its bone like a lumberjack chopping into a tree. Bone splinters sprayed into the air, quickly followed by the sound of cracking. The horse let out a horrid cry, one of pure instinct. It tried to charge Jude, but abruptly tripped over its legless body. It crashed into the ground, sending its rider into the dirt. The knight tried to get to its feet, but a wet rope stopped its movements. From a good distance away, Glennie appeared out of invisibility, his tongue extended into the iconic ability of his legacy. His tongue tethered him to the undead, making it an easy target for Jude's axe. For the second time today, the knight's head bounced off its shoulders. This time Jude didn't stop until his rage made sure the undead's core was fully destroyed. Glennie, meanwhile, took it upon himself to destroy the nightmare stead's core. But not before sharing a glance with Leland. They both looked at their friend, finding the rage of battle nearly consuming the young man. Taking a deep breath, Leland slammed his hand into a different contract, this time the one with the Lord of Spirits. Life force and mana encircled his heart, connecting himself with Jude. The spell took, along with a platter of instinctual one-dimensional thoughts of rage. Leland shook off the feeling, making sure to allow his curse to take upon a new aspect. Soothing music filtered through the air, an illusion of pure bliss. Calming woodwinds met sleepy strings, each adding onto each other until a full symphony wafted through the battlefield. Slowly, the rage of bashing his axe into the night became redundant for Jude. Slowly his senses returned, along with the guilt of momentarily losing himself. He counted to 10, slowly, much slower than ever. He breathed along with his count, allowing Leland's contract to embed itself into his body. How could this happen again? He asked himself. A simple taunt was all it took? Jude cursed at himself. He needed a better way to calm himself. One that didn't involve Leland or Glennie, and differently didn't include counting to 10. Chapter 69, Cores. Leland let out a deep, long, slow sigh. He inwardly cursed, thankful that the battle was over before it really started. A rank 2 monster was one thing, but 2 rank 2 monsters that fought together? He had heard of such things before, but monsters were supposed to be mindless killing machines. Goblins, gnolls and other partially sentient beings were one thing, but an undead? A being that couldn't easily be killed? Leland was starting to think they needed to complain to the guild. At the very least they should get a bit more compensation for their troubles. Everyone okay? He finally asked, mainly worried about the now cooling berserker. Glennie was first to respond. Yes. We made a lot of noise, I'll go look for any more undead. With that, the rogue was off, invisible as ever. Leland took the time to console his friend with a heavy pat on the back. Jude twisted, his eyes bloodshot and his nose widely flaring with every breath. You okay there? Jude stared for a long moment before his face fell. He looked away. I'm fine. Frowning at the odd behavior, Leland said, good. There might be more around, so get up. When Jude didn't move, Leland lightly kicked him. Get up. We are not done here. There is still danger. Jude glared at him, begrudgingly straining to his feet. He picked up his axe, looking at the flat metal of the blade. He grunted, sending it back into his hand tattoo. At that point, he just kept breathing. Deep, long and slow. Watching his friend from the corner of his eye, Leland was about to speak up. Jude, however, cut him off. Thanks, Leels, was all he said. With that, the pair circled the sundered building in the direction Glennie had gone. The rogue made his presence known with an abrupt whisper, telling the others where more undead were. Over the next hour, the team easily destroyed their quota of lesser undead. Soon they had their packs full of depleted undead cores, the quest objective. Glennie did most of the work, his cloak making the battles continuous and simple. After the first few undead, he had a knack for finding the cores after only a few seconds. Breaking the cores, however, was a different story. But the lesser undead were slow and easily manipulated, making the fights more of conjuration practice than anything. Again, the point that Leland was a terrible fighter against undead made itself known. He was able to easily fracture the lesser undead's bones, yet his lack of precision ended his usefulness. Without being able to cause pain to the enemy, Leland's curse simply didn't do much. Occasionally he would break an important bone like the femur or pelvis, but those were few and far between. As it turned out, breaking an inner ear bone didn't slow an undead at all. Jude, meanwhile, sat most of the fights out. He brooded quietly to himself, watching his invisible friend wreak havoc through the undead horde. There was no reason to involve himself, especially since he would just rage out again and become an issue for the others. Once everything was concluded at the ruins, the group left and quickly found themselves en route to a small village. It was a bit out of the way from Frostford, but the quest giver for the undead cores lived there. They would turn in the bat parts at the next small town, any local guild branch, really. A few hours after the ruins, Jude spoke up, I think it's my legacy evolution. Leland and Glennie looked at each other. What is? Why, the knight's taunt made me enraged. Frowning at that, Glennie spoke up, how do you mean? Jude made a disgusted face. A simple taunt made me lose my mind when a hearth bat's full screech didn't. I've been thinking about that for a while, and I can only conclude that my legacy changed somewhat after evolving. So what? Your legacy is now sensitive to taunts? What about insults? Leland asked. Frowning, Jude said, I don't know. You're dumb, Glennie interrupted. Both Jude and Leland looked at him. Guess insults don't make you mad, he muttered. With that, Leland sighed. It seems like we all have stuff to improve on. You both have been telling me not to worry about my legacy, so I guess it's time to return the favor. He looked Jude in the eyes. Don't worry about enraging during battle. We both are there to help if you do. Learning to control it will take time, we all know that. So don't beat yourself up about it. Jude slowly nodded before looking to the dirt trail. An idea sprouted in Glennie's head, one he didn't wish for. Jude, how about some music? Those lessons better be paying off. With that, Jude flushed red. How do you know about that? I followed you, Day. Oh, right. Leland looked between the pair. Oh, is that where you snuck off to the other day? Hey, and here I thought you had a girlfriend or something. Shaking his head like he had water in his ears, Jude pulled his harmonica to his mouth and started to play. The boys strolled into the village with their heads held high and giggles on their lips. They didn't mind the sideways looks, nor the already spreading gossip. They had only one objective in the area, one that they were prepared to fight for. The shop didn't have a name, only a sign with a picture of an iron cauldron and a large wooden stirring stick. They entered and instantly were accosted by the smell. Rotten meat and molding food blocked their path toward the counter like an invisible brick wall. They each choked at the horrid room, their eyes tearing up. The room housed overflowing jars of stuff and sticks of other stuff hanging from the ceiling. Mold covered most of everything, even the walls and floorboards. Looking past the counter, a draining falcon was strung up, its neck slit and feathers already picked. They all paled at that. Glennie had it the worst, his enhanced senses from his legacy breaking his lunch up. He left as quickly as he entered, shoving the pack of undead cores into Leland's hand. Leland and Jude, in turn, gave their friend a look of betrayal. How can I help you? They spun at the scratchy voice, finding an old woman. She stood with a major hunch, shorting her height by nearly half. Her posture allowed the boys to see the top of her head and hair, or what was left of it. Only a sparse few strands of thin grey hair hung, each woven between beads, sticks, and the odd bird skull. We are here about the undead core quest, Leland regretted speaking, his mouth suddenly filling with the horrid taste of the room. There's a problem, however. The woman waved them over with her tattooed hand. A depiction of a wireframe cauldron lay silently on the back of her palm, along with a similar large stirring stick. The mark of the Lord of Witches. Get on over here, I'm not going to bite. My lord has nothing to do with them. Leland and Jude knew what she spoke of instantly. It was a sad fate to become a legacy of the witch. Having a connection to witches, the murderous vile creeps with the W branding on their forehead, no matter how small, was a fate left to a few. Yet, legacies of the witch had it the worst, as their names were keenly similar. Leland and Jude also knew not to hold prejudices about these folks. Their only crime was accepting a lord with a name similar to murderers. Setting the pack down and pulling out the undead cores, Leland paused on two larger ones. They were slightly bigger than the others, like a quarter to a nickel, but still shined with a hint of dark energies. The old woman's hand shot out, snatching the two cores from Leland. A night and a nightmare. How interesting. She shook the small orbs, then held them to her head and shook again. Leland cleared his throat. Right so. Here is the money for the quest. The old woman sat a small sack on the counter. She then pushed it slightly toward the pair. That's not going to cut it, Jude said plainly. The quest listing was only for undead, lesser undead, not named mutations of a rank 2 monster. The legacy of the witch mocked Jude's speech with wordless gestures. Then, with a roll of her eyes, slid all of the cores off the counter and into a small bin. Hey! Give them back! We aren't giving them unless you pay for the higher quality cores. Jude and the woman stared at each other. Passion and irritation clashed for a long second, enough time for Leland to become used to the smell. Just pay us for the extra cores, lady. We got enough lessers to cover the quest. If you can't afford the higher quality ones, then we will sell them elsewhere. She turned to Leland. I have no more money to give. He reached out toward the bin. Then we have to insist you give. The woman's lightning-fast hands shot out again, this time grabbing Leland's outstretched hand. She let loose a low growl. I will have these cores. Trying to pull his hand back and failing, Leland said, then buy them from us. The woman's eyes fell at that, directly onto Leland's hand tattoo. She quirked her head, letting go. That is not right. You cannot have that. What? Jude spit. He snatched the bin back. Why you must leave? You dare bring that into my home? She seeded the last word, like a snake warning all who dared near. Then, her eyes twisted, turning solid grey. Muttering escaped her lips, ones Leland strained to hear. Curses! Death to millennia! How dare you? How dare she? Leland leaned back, frowning at Jude. He reached into the bin, taking the higher quality cores back. Then, like the motion set off a trap, the small room became thick. The woman slowly started to raise, levitating as odd magic flowed around her. Her muttering became manic at this point, signaling to the boys to leave. As they neared the door, her words became booms and shouts, each directed at Leland, hitting him with the force of a decent slap. He stumbled at one, tripping into a shelf full of withered herbs and jars of beetles. The word itself hit harder than the power it imbued. It made him pause, it made him look back. Static had taken over the woman, flashes of white lightning threatened to fully form. She pointed at him, slamming an invisible force into his gut. He skidded across the shop's floor, toward the open door. Get out, she screeched, her voice rippling with dreadful augmentation. How dare a calamity enter my home? With that, Leland didn't wait around any longer. He took the warning for what it was and ran. Chapter 70, Perspective. The huntress sat alone, high in an overgrown tree. The tree sat among many others, hiding her vantage from the common eye. There she was, a hunter overseeing her prey. Or, in this case, 3 young men. Why she watched these boys, she didn't know, only that her instincts told her to. Maybe her age was finally catching up. Maybe she wanted a team that could rival her own prowess. Maybe she saw something in them, something subconscious, something that told her these boys were going to do despicable or great things. Maybe she was just bored. Whatever the case, the huntress watched them. Stalked them. Hunted them. They were important to her. To the point she might murder indiscriminately if something were to happen to them. They were her mark. They were hers too. She craned her neck, shifting the thin branch she stood atop. The slight movement jostled the tree, sending the dead leaves from early winter to the ground. If someone high-ranked was nearby, her presence would surely be noticed. Internally she cursed at herself. The boys messed with her mind. Made her think less as a hunter and more as a mother. She spit the word in her thoughts, instantly writing it off as a singular moment of pure mania. Her, a mother? She scoffed at the notion, especially after watching the scene in the village. Glennie, the one she had spent the most time with, stumbled out of a shop and threw up. Sad, really sad. How could someone who adapted to the sightless king fall to a smell? Jude came out next, a look of horror on his face. Booms and whirlwinds of power radiated through the doorway, enough that the huntress almost moved. Where's the smart one? She asked herself, resigned to see how things played out a bit longer. Leave it up to 3 boys, 3 newborn adventurers to piss off the quest giver. How did they manage that? She might never know. Well, she didn't have a guess. The course. Fighting and killing a named mutation of undead? The quest giver being a legacy of the witch? The two more than likely. The huntress abruptly stood, her weight causing the entire tree to lean. She watched Leland flee from the small shop, trip over himself, then claw away in fear. The boy's friends were there, dragging him away, but the damage had already been done. Shiny gold bow in hand, the huntress lined up a warning shot. If the stupid shopkeeper dared chase after her boys, then, well. She pulled her bow back, her muscles straining like the very branch she stood on. As if on cue, the legacy of the witch stepped out of the building, her frazzled hair sticking straight up. Electricity, the huntress tsked, knowing what that meant. There were very few elemental types of magic that could outrun an arrow. Lightning was one of them. The woman didn't step out of her shop more than a single step. She yelled and yelled, her grand showing of magic nothing more than a dog's bark. The huntress laughed, lowering her weapon. How could she be so foolish? To think she almost intervened with something so trivial. Still, she liked the look of the old woman. She loved seeing the young get chewed out by an elder. In fact, when she was in the capital, yelling at the fresh Inquisitor recruits was her favorite pastime. So, she sat back down, shifting the tree one last time, and listened. The old woman gestured wildly, yelling, "How dare you? How dare a calamity near my home?" The huntress hummed at that, idly wondering what the crazy bat was talking about. A calamity was not a term she was familiar with, nor was it something she expected to simply be able to research. Legacies of the witch tended to know certain, unique, information, especially when it came to lords and the ancient ones. Something about reading the bones or reading fate. Either way, the huntress always listened to what legacies of the witch had to say. "Begone! Begone!" the woman yelled, cracking small bolts of lighting around herself. "Never come back! Otherwise I shall curse you, like you do so many others. Pain. Only pain will befall everyone you love if you near. Like you do so many others," the huntress echoed, her mind spinning. Obviously she was talking about the smart one, but what could it mean? Curses, while not necessarily rare, weren't something many lords handed out as a part of their legacy's primary spells. But, what if they were? Leland's hand tattoo was that of a crow, something that made the huntress think his beneficiary was the Lord of Crows. Does the Lord of Crows use cur? The fall of a single leaf stopped her thoughts cold. With the speed of a jackrabbit, the huntress spun, drawing her bow and loading an arrow. She yanked the string back, not even knowing what her target was, only that she was in danger. Raw power roared to life at her arrow's tip, enough to defend herself against the enemy. An enemy that could sneak up on her. In the center of her vision, she found the source. A bird. A single black, maybe deep purple, bird. It stared at her, judged her, mocked her. It cawed once before flying off. As it left, the huntress realized just what kind of bird it was. A crow. She slithered down the tree, fading back into the brush, and disappearing. The warning was clear enough. A few hours later, the boys were back on the road. They walked, albeit much faster than normal, away from the village with the crazy woman. They were also silent. A silence that was gnawing at Leland. Jude and Glennie kept stealing glances at their friend, at least until it was clear they were not in danger. So, Glennie eventually said. "What was that?" Jude answered first, "Some people just don't know how to make a fair trade." Leland laughed at that, all semblance of stress falling away. "Did she really try to steal those higher quality cores from us?" Glennie's eyebrows rose at that. "And what? You two took them back?" Shrugging, Jude said, "They are ours." Then what was with all the yelling? Particularly the apparent hatred for Leland. "Oh right, that," Leland muttered, looking away. "She recognized my legacy tattoo." Jude and Glennie's eyes widened a bit. "Oh. She called you a calamity," Glennie said quietly, as if the forest had ears. "She did, didn't she?" Leland said before taking a deep breath and looking at his tattoo. "I really wish my lord would help me figure out how to progress forward." Glennie and Jude shared a look. Leels, what are?" "The tattoo pecks me," Leland said frankly. "Sometimes it stares at me, or rather, glares at me." Again Glennie and Jude shared a look. "That is, strange, right?" the rogue asked, looking at his own tattoo. Jude, however, was less subtle. "Hello," he asked the back of his hand. "Hello. Lord of the Berserker? Can you hear me?" He then shook his wrist, squinted at the tattoo of a battle axe, then held it up to his ear. The others laughed at that. The next week was filled with tedious travel. They also turned in the Hearthbad quest, receiving a nice chunk of change for their efforts. With the extra money, the boys decided to buy 3 mounts to make the trip that much faster. It wasn't until the second day with the horses that they each questioned why they hadn't bought mounts sooner. Eventually they arrived at Frostford. The town itself was decently large for a being so far north. The guardian beast that protected the lands brought many hopefuls, thus causing the originally small frontier fort plenty of reason to grow. From a vantage atop a large hill, the boys overlooked the town. From the distance they could see Frostford's skyline. Short wide buildings were present here, along with blazing chimneys, each producing thick grey smoke. A warmth radiated from the town, melting the frozen ground and turning the streets to slick mud. But that didn't stop the townsfolk from going about their days. Most worked with a shrinking timeline on their minds, as the festival was coming up soon. In fact, most of the town was already decorated by streamers, extra monolights, and plenty of small stages for street performers. The boys walked their mounts to the high town walls and waited in line for entry. From where they stood, off to the side of the city, was the coastline. Or at least, they could see the ocean. Frostford owned no beaches and no harbour. The town was situated on top of a steep cliff, one that dropped off directly into salty water. There were, of course, paths down to the water, along with the occasional dock with bound rowboats. But other than fishing, the ocean port was not used for commercial purposes. The guardian beast wanted it that way. Eyeing Frostclaw Island, the guard asked the boys since they were first in line. "Here for the festival." Jude looked over, his vision scanning the steep cliff. There, just off the coast, was a small island of deep green trees. "That's where the herb-picking competition is going to be." The guard nodded. "Adventurers, are we then?" He then pointed to a separate line, one much longer than the one the boys had just waited in. "Adventurers have to enter the town through that gate." The boys looked at the gate and the encompassing line, groaned, then walked to the end. Chapter 71, Frostford. "Are you here for the herb-collecting competition?" Leland and the others eyed the young woman and her hearty smile. The cold day seemed to warm up with her question, like a little furnace in the center of a cabin in the mountains. She looked between the boys while holding a clipboard and spinning a short pencil between her fingers. Yes," Leland answered. "Something wrong?" "Nope," she sang. "I'm with the town's festival organizers. We are just trying to get a headcount before the town really starts getting busy." The boys were still in line outside of Frostford, but they were nearing the front of the tourist and adventurer line. More than a few times, the boys watched unlucky parties wait in the exact line they had been in hours earlier only to be rejected at the front. There was a sort of silent agreement to those in the correct line not to correct those entering the other line. That, or everyone was just antisocial. "Yes we are," Glennie answered. "Just the 3 of you?" she asked back. "Yes." "Names?" "Jude, Leland, and I'm Glennie." "Alrighty," she said, scratching their names down. "And what rank are you entering as?" "That would be team average rounded." The boys looked at each other. Leland frowned and looked away. 2, Jude answered. "Oh. Rather young to be rank 2, aren't you?" "I don't know much about adventurers." "We've had an eventful debut," Leland said, trying to forget about his lack of progress. Internally he cursed at his grimoire more than ever. It was one thing to acknowledge his problem between friends, it was another thing with strangers. Or maybe he was just being insecure. Did she even ask about individual rank? Well, I hope you three are strong, the young woman said. We've got some tough competition this year for your bracket. Does strength really pertain to collecting herbs? Jude asked. I'd guess simply having more competition would be worse than, well, stronger opponents. She shrugged at that. You are correct, and you don't have to worry about too many competitors. That's part of the reason I'm out here. It's first come, first entry. You three are already signed up, so you don't have to worry about that. Then her face fell. The issue is, there is no one maintaining the laws on the island. We have set rules, yes, but that doesn't stop people from attacking others. Leland's brow shriveled at that. People attack others to steal herbs. It's rare, yes. But it does happen. Others wait for teams to encounter the island's monsters and swoop in after they are weakened. So, please be careful. All in the name of reward, hey. She smiled at that, stepping away. Before she began to talk to the next team, she said, this year is supposed to have the best rewards yet. Rumor is something about enchanted items. The boys looked at each other after that. Their faces had hardened at the warning, yet they didn't inch away from the town. In fact, they moved along with the line and eventually reached the front. They went through the ordinary guard questions, names, reason for visits, how long they were planning on staying, any warrants out for arrest and / or outstanding fines. The usual. Does that question about warrants ever catch anyone? Leland asked. You'd be surprised at the level of stupidity of some criminals, the guard explained as he ushered them in. Who knew that such a simple question could count for so many easy bounty collect? A shout from the adjacent line pulled the guard's attention. He cursed, rushing between the boys and to the commotion. He drew his weapon as he ran, a short spear with a lead weight opposite the tip. The boys stopped and watched the scene, as did pretty much everyone else. There was something said about waiting in lines. They were boring, and a potential fight was interesting. A group of 4, each carrying various weapons and / or traps, shouted at the gate guards. They were mad about waiting in the wrong line, and demanded entry. The guards shouted back, ordering them away, and soon the commotion turned into a competition of who could say the most creative insult. Those are some weapons, Glennie commented. Crossbows, bows, survival knives, steel traps, even cages. Something tells me they aren't here for the herbs. Jude and Leland both agreed, but something strange bothered Leland about the group. They were people of the wilderness, that much was apparent. But the way they stood, the clothes they wore, were all wrong. He attributed this to them simply being higher in rank, and walking for miles and miles in the cold simply didn't affect them like it did lower ranks. They didn't shift their weight between feet, hoping to stave off aching soles or blistered toes. They didn't seem to mind their oversized packs stuffed with different wilderness gear. And they didn't care about irritating the guard or the town. It was like they didn't care if they were barred from the festival, almost like they were here for something else. The leader of the group had just spit in a guard's face, ushering a punch to the gut. Soon a small brawl started. A voice stirred the boys from watching the fight. Poachers. They spun finding the young woman from earlier. She continued. There's always a few groups of them this time of year. They think they can get into the town by pretending to be festival goers. Jude frowned at that and set his jaw when he turned back to the now-ending fight. What do they poach? The island has plenty of rare game. There is a dungeon that's said to be hidden somewhere in the thicket, and well, it's overflowing. Some want to take advantage of that, but Frostford clamps down hard on things like this. Our guardian spirit beast wouldn't take lightly to such a thing. Leland hummed at that. This guardian spirit beast, just what is it? The young woman gave a big smile and gestured to the gate. That's what the festival is for. It is said our guardian always loved the snow. Please, enjoy your stay in Frostford. With that, the group was told to enter by a fresh guard, as the other one was still dealing with the poachers. The first thing that hit the group was the smell. A sweet, decadent, fruit smell. They followed their noses, finding a candy store with a large glass window at the front of the building. Through the glass, a burly man hand-stretched molten sugar on a hook without gloves. With each pull, his hands glowed blue, then white, then yellow. The sugar took to the color changes, eventually turning into a green blob. With a show like that, the boys had to go in. A few minutes later, they exited with a pound of still hot watermelon taffy. Continuing down the street, they window shopped for what felt like hours. Every building they passed seemed to be food or drink oriented, and each had roaring fireplaces and workers moving around completing orders. When they eventually exited the food street, they entered the town's main square. The usual fanfare had been moved to the edges, and a great wooden stage had been erected in the very center. Citizens and tourists alike gathered round, watching a children's play. The cast took on cheap costumes, spouting off mumbled lines about starting a new town and looking for places to settle. Kids dressed in patchy fursuits came in at that point, scaring off the others giving the previous monologues. Then, with the flair of an accompanying flute, a bigger child entered the stage. She wore a similar fursuit to the others, but instead of playing common wolves, this young girl wore the skin of a monster the boys couldn't recognize. She had a circular mask, one with thick fangs and an angry temperament. She charged the wolf children, banishing them from the stage before slowly inching towards the settler kids. The lead then initiated a slow contact with the guardian beast, seeking its protection. A silent deal was struck, and the guardian child exited the stage as the lead planted a flag of ownership. The play ended with a flurry of paper confetti. And just in time for the first snow of winter, the town of Frostford was founded by partnership of protection. Human and guardian spirit beast, living together and protecting each other, the lead kid said to the crowd, before being outshined by applause. The boys clapped along and eventually left the main square. They ventured around the town, finding an inn and grabbing a proper meal. As the darkness rolled in, and with it, dark clouds originating from further north, they walked along with the nightlife, taking in everything the early days of the festival had to offer. Jude danced with a woman much too old for him. Glennie helped fend off multiple pickpockets before fading back into the shadows. Leland talked with two magic scholars visiting from a prominent city. All in all, the boys felt like this was the first night in forever that they'd simply had a good fun night. Too bad the overhead clouds were shifting and twisting into something fierce. Chapter 72, Rewards. The first snow festival officially started 4 days after the boys arrived. Legacies of weather, snow, and storms had gathered together, foretelling that it would snow any day now. But, after 3 days of celebration, Frostford was getting angsty. What was the point of a festival if the thing they were celebrating never happened? Truthfully, the younger residents of the town didn't care about that. It was the older few, the curmudgeon type, that cursed the skies. Most everyone was happy with the festival regardless of snow. In fact, many of the tourists thought it would be better if it didn't snow. Most of the town's activities were outside after all. The boys, during all of this, prepared themselves for the herb-gathering quest. First thing they did was purchase proper winter wear, well, except for Glennie. The rogue had decided his cloak was enough to keep him warm, the infinite energy it gave him helped regulate his body heat somewhat. Not to mention, despite the cloak being a parasitic item, it was still a cloak. The wind chill did little to bother him. Jude, on the other hand, decided to wear light. While he did buy a heavier undershirt and a light jacket, the legacy of the berserker was perfectly fine with going sleeveless if he had to. I do not fear the cold, it should fear me, he had told the others when they questioned him about it. So, that left Leland as the odd man out. But frankly, he was fine with that if it meant being warm. A wool jacket, multiple sets of underwear, big fluffy socks, waterproof boots, and of course, his gifted mage robes. Despite being a birthday present, his set of robes weren't getting the use they should be. The enchanted effect, while amazingly effective for regular mages, simply wasn't necessary for Leland. A boosted mana regeneration rate was good and all, great in fact, except he only used a fraction of the mana as the average mage. At some point, while looking through an enchantment store, Leland had the idea to upgrade. His parents wouldn't see it as a betrayal, in fact they would praise him for being pragmatic enough to forego his present for something more useful. Too bad they don't have a life force regeneration enchantment, he thought after flipping through the shop's entire catalog of commissioned enchantments. The team also bought plenty of items for their time on the isolated island. Proper herbology equipment, travel rations, a few emergency fire starting kits, and many more utility items. All in all, the boys were packed and ready to go. They had enjoyed the festival quite a bit, but it was time to get down to the reason they even traveled to Frostford. "Welcome, welcome," yelled the town's mayor, Mr. Frostlung. He stood atop a wooden stage at the center of the town's square, bundled up in so many scarves most of his face was covered. "Here we gather today for competitive spirit. The mayor started a round of clapping that was sparsely echoed from the gathered crowd. He then cleared his throat, and continued, "Now then, you all are here for our great town's annual herbology competition. Why do we have this competition, you might ask? Well, it's very simple. Because all of the spring herbs, the very herbs we use throughout the year for many much needed uses, are ripe for the picking." Mr. Frostlung paused, obviously expecting applause. He grunted at the silence before throwing up his hands in a grand display. "Yet, the island where the herbs grow is very dangerous. Only the tough and experienced can even brave the journey to the island. What might you see once you step foot on dry land? No one knows." He then laughed. "Beside the town's guardian spirit beast. Get on with it," someone yelled, their identity hidden in the crowd's anonymity. The mayor frowned at that, cleared his throat, and gestured to a wooden board. There, a multitude of hand-drawn pictures of various flowers, roots, plants, moss, and vines were on display. They ranged from simple green-leafed stem and flower to a large crisscross of various buds and bulbs. Some sparked with elemental magic, like a yellow rose with static drawings of lighting or a deep amber moss leaking a small pool of lava. "Here are the herbs our fair town requires, as well as the herbs you all are competing for. Memorize them now, for there is no signage like this one here on the island." The mayor then pointed to the corner of one of the drawings. A single number was plastered lazily there. Each herb has an associated number attached. The rare or more difficult the herb, the more points. The team with the most points after 2 days is considered the winner. The young woman, who the boys recognized from the gate a few days earlier, rushed onto the stage and whispered something into the mayor's ear. The man nodded with her words before stepping back into the middle of the stage. "I have just been reminded that broken, improperly harvested or malformed herbs will not be accepted for points. So, I hope you brought someone with a steady hand." Mr. Frostlung laughed to himself. "Now then, I'll leave you to capable hands. Good luck everyone. Remember to stay warm." The crowd grumbled at that. "What about the rewards for winning?" someone yelled. The mayor paused at that, spinning on his heel and stepped back to center stage. "Of course. How could I forget? This year we've had several items donated to our cause. But since you are all mostly adventurers, I will get to the weapons and equipment. Our resident legacy of enchanting, Ms. Barnswell, has spent the last year collecting splendid items for a keen hand such as herself. I will start with the rewards for the rank 2 teams." The mayor stepped over to a small table and pulled off a covering sheet. He held up a pair of sandals. Enchanted with burst of speed, these sandals will greatly increase the wearer's top sprint speed for a few seconds. These will be rewarded to the third-place team along with a monetary stipend. The crowd grumbled at that and Leland could see why. The enchantment was quite powerful, especially during combat. A surprise rush or retreat is a great way to end a life or save one. Yet, the sandals themselves weren't impressive. They were simple sandals, or at least, the mayor didn't specify they weren't. No other effects were lackluster. "For second place we have this." Mr. Frostlung held up a large kite shield. It looked impossibly light for being solid metal and leather, Leland thought. And while the floral design along the front was beautifully painted, no one on his team used shields. Still, there was a shimmer along the base of it, one that the mayor went on to explain. "This shield has 2 enchantments. From my ease of hosting such a hunk of metal, you must have already deduced that the enchantment light as a feather reduced its weight. But that is not all. Ms. Barnswell has outdone herself with this. She was able to squeeze in Thorny Vine enchantment as well." A quiet murmur went through the crowd. It was obvious most were confused, even Leland who had read and reread enchantment books in his magical homeschooling. "That got your attention, hey?" the mayor laughed. "Thorny Vine is an enchantment Ms. Barnswell has been working on for several years. One might say it is her gift to the world. And that is no exaggeration. Thorny Vine allows the user of this shield to plant it into the ground. From there, the shield will sprout thorny roots that will follow the user's will. No longer will your enemies flee from battle. Not with their legs bound by roots." That got the crowd listening. They looked between the mayor and the shield, greed in their eyes. Even Jude had fallen victim to the enchanted item. "We need to win this," he whispered. Glennie gave him a look. "You don't use a shield." "So? I might have to learn. Do you know how many times monsters run from me?" Leland was about to reply with some sarcastic comment that'd surely egg his friend on, but the mayor set the shield down and picked up the last prize. Leland instantly became interested as he saw the gnarled wooden staff the man was showing off. For first place we have something very special. While enchanted, this item was not enhanced by Ms. Barneswell. No, in fact, this magical staff was received as a monster drop from the final boss of a goblin shaman dungeon. The crowd went silent again. Now, what's so special about a goblin staff? Well, it's simple really. This is a parasitic item. Fire burned in Leland's eyes as he bore holes into the wooden staff. Parasitic items, like Glennie's cloak, were nearly always scooped up by the rich or royals. That was if the adventuring team didn't decide to equip it right away. Having one drop from a dungeon was a once-in-a-lifetime event, most were bonded still within the dungeon. Leland was under no illusion that if he wanted one, he would need vast wealth or impossible luck. Well, that was, if he couldn't win this competition. Sorry Jude, he said. Looks like we aren't going for second place. Jude nodded along, his eyes latched onto the staff. It's no problem, roots are overrated anyway. The mayor carefully set the staff down on the table and then showed off the much lesser rewards for rank 1 teams. Once finished, he replaced everything on the table, then someone quickly gathered the rewards and was escorted away by an armed security unit. I hope that the rewards got everyone excited, he said. Now, my job here is done. Please listen to young Ms. Lavender for the more technical details. Good luck. With that the mayor stepped off the stage and the young woman from the gate stepped front and center. Over the next hour she directed all 33 rank 2 adventurers participating in the competition to exit the town. Chapter 73, The Competition. The competitors were led out of the town and towards the cliff face and ocean. They traveled as a single unit, as Ms. Lavender wouldn't allow anyone to find their own route onto the island. So, they traversed a descending ramp, one that carved through the cliff and down toward the shore. It was then Ms. Lavender explained some background about the island. It's said that there is a dungeon hidden in the foliage. There used to be a summoning stone, but our town's founders destroyed it when it became apparent that our guardian spirit beast wanted it to remain hidden. You're trying to make me believe that there's a prime dungeon out there, just ready to be conquered, and no one has tried to find it, a middle-aged woman carrying a thick long bow asked. Ms. Lavender's smile waned for a moment but her stride never hesitated. People have looked, but those usually involve poachers or royal surveyors, 2 types of people who wouldn't tell others of their finding. Leland wondered about that. If a surveyor found the dungeon, surely it would be documented publicly somewhere, right? Otherwise why were citizens paying taxes? If they couldn't use such resources, wouldn't the position of surveyor be redundant? But then again, he didn't pay taxes, so, then he thought about that more. Should I be paying taxes? Leland made a mental note to ask Glennie later. You get a lot of poachers, an older man asked, his right hand on the hilt of a thin sword. A few groups a year, yes. But getting to the island is more formidable than most assume, so we deal more often with their dead bodies once they wash up. Ms. Lavender remained ignorant of the grim faces of those following her. From there she continued her spiel about the island's history, however Leland and the other boys tuned her out. Quietly, and with the subtlety of a prowling cat, the boys glanced at each other then to a different competitor. Together they sized everyone up with a simple nod or shake of a head. They didn't expect to get into a fight, but knowing who they thought they could win against now would be ever valuable. The team the trio agreed to be their primary competition was actually a duo. While teams up to 4 were allowed entry, having 3 was not as uncommon as it seemed. Though, 2 was pushing it in Leland's eyes. The team of 2 only meant one thing to him: they were strong. The duo came in the form of a man and a woman. The woman was more eye-catching as her heavy armor was as shiny as a silver coin. She held a mace upon her hip, but it was obvious her main weapon was the spiked shield she carried on her back. From the amount of dried blood, it was obvious the woman was very experienced in battle. The man, however, was no less intimidating. The man was a mage, his hand tattoo of 3 runic circles all but confirmed that. He wore similar robes to Leland, yet the man's were more worn and tired. There was an old saying about mages, and that was to count the patches on their clothes. If they had more than 1 or 2, it meant the mage could fight in a melee and survive. The man was a survivor, his weapon proved to Leland as much. A sword, enchanted and inscribed with different magical archetypes and affinities, and a bauble lined his belt. The bauble was unique, in that Leland didn't recognize its use. He gathered it had something to do with the lightning affinity, simply due to it sparking with blue arcs of electricity, otherwise he was clueless. A spell sword, Leland thought, remembering the path to power quite well from the magical books he read as a child. A spellsword's gimmick, if you could call it that, was that they fought in the scuffle rather than in the backlands like a normal mage. Instead of shooting fireballs, they would imbue their weapons or their bodies with fire. Either way, Leland kept an eye on the man. The large group neared the waterline at this point, and the first unobstructed view of the island was front and center. The island itself was 2 or 3 times larger than its patron town, yet there were no houses or infrastructure. It was simply an island, untouched by man. Pine needle trees created a thick curtain, blocking all view into the brush from their current distance. A gentle early morning mist wafted from the base of the trees and suddenly the boys each shivered. They all hated mist at this point, the memory of Shoutwell still fresh on their minds. Hopefully that clears up, Jude muttered to his 2 friends. Ms. Lavender heard his words and turned with a great smile. She pointed to the sky, misunderstanding his comment. We want the sky to be dark and grey like it is. This is the first snow festival, after all. Giving her a confused stare, Jude took a moment to respond. I was talking about the mist. Mist, sucks. There were several grunts in agreement. Oh. Ms. Lavender replied. More than likely, I'd say. Jude then said something only he would say, keeping the attention drawn to himself. Glennie, not listening to the back and forth, nudged Leland and nodded to a team of 4. At first Leland wasn't sure what he was supposed to be looking at. The team was very unremarkable. They wore common winter clothes, not too dirty, not too clean. They carried heavy packs spilling with useful wilderness items, as well as a range of weapons. 2 carried a bow or crossbow, while the others a sword or mace. None were magical, at least to Leland's eye, so he was truly stumped. What is it? He whispered to Glennie. That's just it, the rogue replied. I'm getting no feeling from them. No special strengths, no special abilities. They are just a team of 4. Does that make sense? Pondering the question, Leland took another look at the team. While he agreed they looked like nothing special, he just wasn't seeing what Glennie was. They looked like the quintessential adventuring team, the team that every survival guide written in the past century suggested. There was no flair, no style, no personality. They blended into the crowd, almost perfectly. I think I see what you mean, Leland finally whispered back. Let's keep an eye on them and the duo. Glennie agreed and refocused on Ms. Lavender and Jude's conversation. They talked all the way to the small dock, much to the annoyance of those around them. All right gang. Ms. Lavender said, turning to everyone. This is as far as I go. I would like to say good luck to everyone one last time. So, good luck. Thanks. Jude replied, receiving a roll of the eyes from pretty much everyone nearby. Ms. Lavender took a single step onto the dock and activated a hidden runic circle among the wood grain. She blinked a few times at her feet, then bent over and touched a few points in a fast motion. By the time she stood up, the dock was glowing a bright blue. She stepped back onto the dirt, a smile on her face. This is a teleportation key. It's an open secret that the town of Frostford uses one for the island, but please don't go spreading what you just saw to any and everyone, Ms. Lavender said. If the island is picked clean before the festival, then there won't be a competition for that year. And we might have to involve the Inquisitors, that would be trespassing after all. Various nods went around the group. I'm glad we have an understanding. The docks will be active for 2 days, so come back whenever you need or want. Now then, teams will go over one by one in the order they signed up. She scanned down her clipboard. Up first, we have Lydia and Philin. The spell sword and spike shield holder stepped forward. After a brief instruction by Ms. Lavender, the pair stepped onto the dock. 15 seconds ticked by, then they were suddenly gone. Ms. Lavender squinted across the water to the island's identical glowing dock. 2 familiar outlines suddenly appeared. Ah! They made it. I'm always afraid something will go wrong and they will be in bits and pieces or something. Everyone looked at the woman like she had grown a second mouth. Next we have. The boys were 6th to last to gain entry to the island. They stepped onto the dock and moments later appeared across the water. Jude and Glennie wobbled from the disorienting effect, their breakfasts threatening to come up. Leland grinned at them feeling perfectly fine. The other 2 glared at him. Blame my dad, Leland said. He used to teleport me to the bathroom as a child whenever I was about to have an accident. Instantly the teleportation sickness cleared up in Jude and Glennie as they laughed and proceeded to mock Leland. Together, they soon ventured out onto the island and headed past the curtain of pine trees. They had a singular goal: to win. Back on the mainland, Ms. Lavender rounded out the last few teams. A team of 3 stood on the dock, then disappeared and reappeared on the island's dock. She turned to the last team. "Seems like you 4 are last," she said. "Just wanted to give you all extra luck." "So, good extra luck." The team did not look impressed. In fact, they looked as indifferent as possible. Unremarkably so. They silently stepped onto the dock, and subtly gained a bit of mirth. Soon they were on the island like everyone else, honestly surprised that they had such an easy time infiltrating. The boss shall be pleased. Chapter 74, Island. The first fleck of this season's snow fell just past noon on the opening day of the herbalism competition. The boys were wandering around the island, completely oblivious to the single snowflake. It fell silently, drifting through the slight breeze like a dandelion seed finding a new location to grow. It landed on the leaf of some bizarre red plant, where the magically heated flower melted it instantly. It was nearly 6 minutes later that the boys found the plant. But by then, dozens of snowflakes had fallen. "Ah," Jude purred with his hands out, reaching toward the heat-producing plant like it was a blazing campfire. The heat did little to give the berserker reprieve, the cold being much more substantial than he had anticipated. So, when Leland cut the base of the plant's stem with a small knife, Jude's eyebrows danced in betrayal. "Hey," he snipped, only to be silenced by an annoyed glare. "Don't get mad at us because you didn't dress warm enough. If I remember correctly, you said," Leland cleared his throat and put on a mocking tone, "a true warrior doesn't get cold on the battlefield." Jude's face fell, but then, like a phoenix rising, smirked. "This isn't hardly a battlefield, we are just picking herbs." Glennie and Leland looked from their friend's triumphant smile to each other. The rogue said, "Sure proved us wrong, hey." Jude's smile preened. Glennie continued, "Being right doesn't make you warm, though." Jude's smile fell. Leland didn't let up. "But once we start fighting, then surely he's going to warm up." Jude hesitated, but eventually smiled. The mage continued, "Although, it's been half a day and we haven't seen one thing to fight. Unless you count those owls that just took off when we neared." Raising his hands in surrender, Jude said, all right. I get it. I should have brought a thicker coat." And like a rehearsed duet, Leland and Glennie looked at each other, set their packs down, and dug through them. Leland returned with wool gloves, Glennie with a heavy long-sleeve shirt. They both thrust the items to Jude. "Were you two waiting for me to say I was wrong before giving me these?" Jude asked, receiving 2 idle shrugs. "Gee thanks." With the freed spot in his bag, Leland slipped the heat-producing flower into the pocket along with the pair of gloves he was wearing. If anything, he'd have a nice hand warmer in a few minutes. With that herb settled, the boys continued through the island forest. Over the course of the next hour, more snow fell, enough for the boys to make comments on. While celebrating the first snowfall wasn't something any of them cared to do, it was always nice to see the white dust. Their hometown was significantly south, making snow this time of year near impossible. That didn't mean snow wasn't known to their town. In fact, the boys had several shared memories of snowball fights and snow angels over the years. Simply seeing the snow in a different setting was quite eye-opening for all 3. They'd already come so far in such a short amount of time. This time last year they were at home daydreaming of adventures such as the one they were currently on. Except for Jude. He only dreamed of killing monsters and hard-fought battles. He wasn't the type to care for exploration and seeing natural wonders. Still, the wonders the team faced on the island were something special. From the many distinct and magical types of herbs to the unusual wildlife, they had seen enough oddities to truly acknowledge they were somewhere special. The island, cultivated by Frostford's patron guardian spirit beast, was enough to implant a new snow memory beside the others. It wasn't until the group decided to rest and eat dinner that trouble found them. Or rather, smelled them. Uncovering themselves from the dense foliage, 2 obsidian black panthers stalked toward the group. As they walked, their front claws extended with blue ice and encased their already deadly claws. Soon the cats unleashed their full magical might, calling attention to themselves a moment before they pounced. The sudden blare of magic made each of the boys react in different ways. Glennie, sitting at their small fire facing the surprise attack, reacted first and without recourse. He rushed to his feet, hitting a pure sprint before disappearing within the cloak and turning invisible. He strode straight over the fire, not even feeling the embers against his boots. Jude reacted next, spinning to the attack with open arms. A muscled beast, clad in icy armor, flew through the air. They collided, one an iron wall, the other a sharp dagger. Claws sank into his skin, the pain only fueling his anger. Without ceremony or worry, Jude rotated the panther with his enhanced strength, and body slammed it to the frozen ground. Leland reacted last. He turned in reaction with the others, yet he never moved from where he stood. Instead, a faded blue magical bubble appeared around the young warlock, originating from his protective necklace. The panther collided with the aegis, like a bug against a windshield. It crumpled under its own force, giving Leland enough time to whistle. "Maul," he commanded, summoning a murder of ethereal crows. They appeared on the nearby tree branch for a fleeting moment before bombarding the beast. Leland's next curse came in right after the previous, and for a heartbeat, he could feel raw instinct from the panther. Their connection severed just in time for Glennie's twin crimson-red spikes to embed themselves into the monster's ribs. It stopped squirming a few seconds later, but the crows and Glennie had already moved to help Jude. The berserker stumbled back after rolling around in the dirt with the first panther. He hastily got to his feet, although the battle was already won. Glennie slipped out of invisibility, having already made the creature's corpse a pincushion. The crows also flew to nearby branches, watching, waiting. "You okay there, Jude?" Leland asked, stepping forward and removing his ring of regeneration. Jude, for what it was worth, looked like hell. Covered in blood and loose dirt, wearing two shirts now shredded into ribbons, and grimacing as if holding back a cracking dam wall. He muttered rushed and muted numbers, counting as high as his legacy would allow. Slowly his breathing became level and his rage died down. Accepting Leland's ring, Jude said, "Yet." The others looked at each other before finding more important things to do. Glennie turned invisible and confirmed their safety. Leland shuffled through his pack, pulling out a sewing kit and another shirt. "Do I need to sew up a wound as well as those shirts?" "Regeneration only goes so far," he asked, finding Jude staring at the panthers. Jude shook his head, and lifted an arm. Across his side and chest were 10 claw marks in the form of red streaks. "They aren't deep, no. I should be good." Leland nodded and signaled for Jude to remove his shirt. A few minutes later, the bleeding stopped and washable bandages found themselves around the berserker's torso. A new long-sleeve shirt replaced the old. Glennie returned not long after. "I think we are safe from monsters, but we aren't safe from that." He pointed straight up, through the canopy. Above was brooding grey swirls and rapid winds. Once pointed out, the howling wind made itself known to the trio. The trees were doing a good job blocking most of the wind shear, but it was obvious what was coming. "A blizzard?" Jude asked. Leland nodded his head. "Not a natural one, however. See how the clouds are swirling into themselves? Classic evidence of magical involvement." Knowing the answer already, Glennie still felt the need to ask. "What does that mean?" "It means, someone is doing something very illegal here. Weather magic, while used by some towns and cities as a means to mass water crops with a rain spell, was highly illegal when permission wasn't given by the local government. Maybe Frostford just really wants a good snowfall for their festival?" Jude asked. Shaking his head, Leland said, "Blizzard spells are highly illegal. Unless most of the town's leadership wanted to risk going to jail for a chunk of their lives, this is not them." "What do we do then?" Glennie asked. "Find shelter, I guess. Unless we want to call it and quit the competition." Jude and Glennie looked at Leland like he was dumb. "With the chance of a parasitic staff? No way." Leland gave them a soft smile. "All right. We are going to need to find a cave or something like that." Like a lightning bolt, Glennie shot off, turning invisible and rushing through the forest. Jude and Leland followed as quickly as they could. All across the island, the adventurers participating in the competition looked to the sky in confusion. Those that understood the implications of such weather sought shelter, those that didn't simply trudged on and collected more points. In fact, all teams were relatively near each other when it came to who had the most points. All except one team of 4. They had other prizes to capture. Alive, preferably. And they had just picked up a scent. Soon, under the cover of the blizzard, they would have free rein to do whatever they wanted. Chapter 75, Cub. A vein in the Huntress Temple throbbed like no other. She took her eyes off the boys for less than a week and they'd already gotten themselves into trouble. First a murderous witch, then a city invaded by cultists. Now a weather mage of some kind on a remote island? She honestly couldn't believe it. They were magnets for trouble, more so than any other children she knew. She had been watching the storm grow over the last few hours, and the pure white hell it produced. The island was unreachable, even for her. Sure, she could brave the blizzard, but she didn't think her presence would matter very much. It was obvious the boys weren't the target, they were just unfortunate bystanders. Or at least she thought. If someone wanted them dead, they could simply kill them in the streets or where they slept. They were fine combatants for their age and experience, sure, but anyone with a brain could kill 3 gullible boys. All it would take was a pretty face or a sob story. Or simply overpowering them the way she would do it. So, that left the purpose of the blizzard to be something else. The huntress pondered this as the crowd below started to gather. She was hidden on the rooftops, one of the few vantage points in Frostford to view both the town hall and the island in the distance. The mayor and a few others were discussing the blizzard and what to do. It seemed to the huntress that no one knew how to deal with an isolated magical storm. She might have to nudge them onto the correct path, or she didn't. Frankly, she didn't care about this town, its people, or the guardian spirit beast overseeing the area. She also didn't care if she was officially called to help, unless witches were involved, that was. Which, they might be. The longer she watched the clouds twist and let loose a flurry of snow, the more she believed someone of decent power to be at fault. What to do? What to do? Soon the town would be engulfed, which could be the true objective. A parasitical staff. People killed for less, the huntress knew from first-hand experience. She cursed at herself. She wouldn't even be here if she hadn't pushed the smart one to come to this town. Gah, how could she have been so foolish? Why not send them somewhere nice, somewhere with an actual beach and warm weather? Why'd she have to send them to the icy north? The huntress peered through the window of the building she stood on. The crowd had nearly doubled since she started paying attention to it. There were many concerned citizens and tourists. It seemed that some were saying their vacations were ruined. She rolled her eyes at that. This was supposed to be her vacation. She had taken time off after Shoutwell and the cold to make sure the boys weren't up to something and to rest. First she was threatened by a crow and now this? The huntress' vein throbbed even more. What to do? What to do? With a mighty huff, she slid down off her perch and hid within the growing crowd. It was easy to go unnoticed. Most were looking to the mayor, and she was used to being subtle. A true hunter could kill their target by becoming their best friend if they needed. To the huntress, acting the part of a concerned citizen was child's play. She waited a few minutes, listening to the town's woes and pleading to her lord for an opening to speak soon. She wasn't sure how much more of this she could take. After a particularly agitated man and his 2 children were escorted out, the huntress took her chance with the silence. "It's magic. A spell," was all she said. That roused the crowd, pulling plenty more fits of rage. The mayor was instantly in the firing line and promptly was demanded to respond. He didn't. So the huntress did. "An illegal spell," she said, raising her voice to combat the horrid yelling. Her vein was throbbing even harder now. "Highly illegal." With that, the crowd went silent. They looked between her and the mayor. The older gentleman, Mr. Frostlung, hesitated, allowing the vulture-like citizens to pounce. Calls to contact the inquisitors were sounded within minutes, which was all the huntress wished to do. She slipped out of the crowd, slowly walking backwards against the crowd that lurched forward. She hung out at the back of the room just to make sure things were going to proceed the way she wanted them to. "Is what you say true?" The huntress startled at the words, not because she didn't know someone was standing beside her, but rather she wasn't expecting said person to talk to her. The crowd was too enthralled with yelling at the mayor to pay attention to her. Why was a young woman trying to talk to her? That wasn't usually what happened in these sort of delicate operations. The huntress eyed the young woman. "Yes. Weather spells, especially snow-related ones, are illegal." The young woman clutched a clipboard to her chest. "Those on the island are going to be fine, right? The storm is right on them." Eyeing the child through the corner of her eye, the huntress reminisced on why she hated socializing. So many people worry, so little people do. Even if they weren't, what could you do to help them? "Trust me, magical blizzards are nothing to play in." The young woman shook her head. "I could try to signal them from the dock. Maybe some will." If they wish to leave, they will. Those are adventurers out there, not children. The huntress rolled her eyes at her own comment. Well, most aren't children. Those smart enough to take shelter will, at least until the herb competition comes to an end. Adventurers always want money and shiny toys. Risking their lives is something ingrained into them. The last sentence was said with a snarl, one the young woman didn't notice. I just hope they are okay. That, the huntress could agree with. At least for those special three she had decided to stalk. They were important to her, whether or not she could admit it. Hiding under the forestry and underbrush was a small opening leading into a small cave. With only enough room for the boys to sit, their fire was horribly small. Yet, the underground tunnel was warmer inside than out in the blizzard. Without the wind chill, the boys found the temperature manageable. Even Jude was content with their rocky inn, despite there being no battle around to warm him. Currently they shared a late dinner, the blizzard almost making them miss the meal. Their food? The large roach-like insect they followed into the cave. As it turned out, bug meat was much more palatable when charred pure black. Essentially, the exoskeleton worked as a sealed pot, boiling the internal meat in its own juices. I can't believe we have to eat this, Jude complained after taking his second helping. Glennie rolled his eyes. Blame Leland. What the heck, Leels? Jude laughed in a mocking tone. I didn't create the blizzard, Leland replied. Blame that guy. You did identify it to be still growing, Glennie huffed, slurping at the bug stew. True, but it wasn't my idea to grill up the roach. That was your idea. Rationing now will save us heartache later. At least, if what you say about the blizzard taking days to disperse is true. Leland nodded to that. Someone is maintaining the spell, yes. I'm now sure of it. It won't simply go away until they stop. Jude perked up at that. Then we should go find them. Make them stop. He smashed his fist into his palm. That's a good way to run into an ambush. Obviously whoever is making the blizzard was prepared. What's to say they don't have protection? Glennie asked. Probably one of the competitors and their team. Leland pondered his friend's words. They were true, at least with the information they had to go off of. But he did wonder, just which team was it? The spiked shield and spell sword duo came to mind first, but the spell sword already showed his element to be lightning. Which could technically create a blizzard, if the caster really wanted to. But Leland doubted that it would be highly inefficient. So that meant it was someone else. The image of four, completely unassuming adventurers came to mind. Nah, he thought, continuing through the list. Eventually dinner ended and Leland and Glennie fell asleep. Jude took first watch and sat with his back to the fire near the cave's entrance. As he sat there, bored as could be, he began to practice. Harmonica in hand and playing so lightly the howling whines overshadowed the notes, Jude continued his mastery over the instrument. She crawled, each paw, even the one leaking blood like a cracked bucket, pushed into the fresh snow. Her tracks were obvious, that much she knew, but she had to run. Her life depended on it. Her pursuer, while they might not kill her instantly, definitely would be the cause of her death. Through captivity or for some snob noble's mantle, she would die if she was caught. She had to get home. She had to. Mother would protect her. It was Mother's job after all. A simple deal the very humans that sought to take their pelt. She snarled in rage at the thought. Mother surely would have her own opinions on the matter, but not her. She knew how untrusting humans were. She saw them in a way her mother never could. Like right now. She only ventured a few steps from her home, she was practically still in their backyard. That was all it took to be hunted. Still, she ran. Mother would kill those who dared enter their domain. She would. She stopped cold. Not because of the blizzard, frozen ground, or even the poachers following closely behind. Where? She spun, looking for familiarity in the forest. She had left her home while the area was still green. How was she supposed to expect everything to turn so white? She was nearby, she knew. But where? Where? Her heart beat faster. She had never felt like this before. Mother was always there to soothe her. To sing to her. To preen with her. To. Something grew within her. Something that made her loose muscles stiffen and her mind fall apart. She could admit it. She was a fool. She should have listened to her mother. She should have stayed in her home where it was safe and warm. Mother! A stick snapped in the distance. She turned, finding only white hail. How far were they? Was she within their view? Was she found? What would mother do? She asked herself, finding the answer easily. Her mother would listen, something she had done since she gained her intelligence so many lifetimes ago. She had listened to the humans. She had heard all of the woes and pleas. She had then thought, concluding with the best course of action. Then she would react. Then she would make a move. Standing in the blizzard, the little cub craned her neck, pushing her ears toward the sound of the stick. She heard them, it was easy despite the howling wind. They were close, too close. She needed to move, she needed to run. But she also knew that would only end in her capture. Her leg, the one with the arrow sticking through it, wouldn't get her far. She needed to find home. She needed to listen for. What is that? She thought, hearing a nearby cry. It ebbed and flowed, rising in pitch and lowering like a bird's song. Song? Is that music? Mother? She blasted off, the pain in her leg momentarily forgotten. Mother was near. She was here. She had come out of their home to save her. The cub pushed through the underbrush and snow. It was then she recognized where she was. Everything looked familiar. That small arching plant. That rock that looked like a face. The big broken stick with the weird barbs on it. The cave. Oh, how she missed the cave and the many, many things it held. Like the glowing mushrooms further down. Or the human sitting in the enter. Her eyes widened as her pause came to a full stop. It wasn't her mother, in fact, it was the complete opposite. She stared at the human as he stared back. Both looked on in shock, but then sadness overcame the human. He looked at her with such hurt in his eyes. The same look her mother had when father died. Oh, you poor thing, the human whispered. He reached forward, taking her. She wanted to run, she needed to hide. But she couldn't move. She couldn't cry. She was petrified in fear. Frozen solid like the ice her mother commanded. Yet as the human cradled her, she began to thaw. He was warm.